Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or possibly good evening, boys and girls, as this is a children's story reading, which is just long enough for a bedtime story before you go to bed. Now, when mummy or daddy says go to bed, that's what you do. Okay, so you've been allowed to have a 15 to 20 minute story, which I'm now using a lot of the time off by explaining all the ground rules to you, but that means that I can get more mileage out of the actual readings I've done, because I'll do this, I'll repeat this bit over and over again at the beginning of every clip. So, without further ado, we'll go to the next thrilling instalment of Jimmy and the Pink Diamond. So, continued Genya, this parrot is thief. Simple. We find man, tell him price of diamond, we make good price. Man like deal. Man buys diamond, everybody happy. We get money, we fly home. That's right, my boy, that's right, cried Boris. I couldn't have put it any better myself. Jimmy heard bits and pieces of the plan, but it made no sense to him. He was much too tired. He forced himself to keep his eyes open. When the ravens realized that he was asleep, they carefully covered him up with the newspaper snippets, so that he would stay cozy and warm. As Jimmy slept, they talked long into the night. None of them were sure of whether their plan would work, but they all knew one thing. Somehow they had to make it happen. Many animals were depending on them. For many years now, Grandfather Boris Varonovich and his wife Katya had dreamt of setting up a rest home for old animals, especially for some of the city birds, old horses, stray dogs and cats. With the money from the diamond, they could buy a small cottage in the suburbs of Moscow. Grandfather had seen one he liked. It was a good cottage with land. A house like that is called a dacha. Boris had a friend, an old engineer, who was willing to sell his for a reasonable price. The pensioner promised to put Boris's money in the bank for the raven to use whenever he needed it. He and the raven were old friends. They shared the same dream of helping all the forgotten animals who lived uncertain lives in the city. The trouble with running away. Granny Anna was in a good mood when she came home from the movies. What a lovely film, so romantic. She went into the kitchen to make herself a nice cup of tea, and nearly fainted when she saw the mess on the floor. She picked up the lamp and saw the broken vase. Oh, we've been robbed! Her heart was beating fast. After a quick search, she realized that nothing was missing except some food. But wait, where was her shopping bag? Where was Jimmy? Where was her best tea towel? She began to talk to herself. Look at that hole punched into the can of soda. Are those bird footprints in the mayonnaise? Birds were here today. Really big birds. But how? Her head was spinning. She called, Jimmy, Jimmy, Jimmy. He was always waiting at the door whenever she came in. She searched the house again, as a panicky feeling washed over her. Something terrible had happened to him. Had the robbers taken him? Anna brushed the thought away. Think logically, Anna, she muttered. He's still on the balcony. She ran to the study and looked out of the window. 2 large tomatoes lay on the balcony tiles. That was an obvious clue, but Jimmy wasn't there either. How odd! She exclaimed. She went downstairs to her neighbour, Mr. Keese, and rang his bell. They searched the small garden and looked into the shed. Look, Anna, exclaimed Mr. Keese. Here is a big black feather. I never seen such a big one. He examined it carefully. I can't imagine what kind of bird left this. It is much too large for a crow, said Keese. Granny climbed slowly back up the stairs to her apartment and let herself in. What in the world had happened to Jim, and who had messed up my kitchen? Was it a robber? Of course not. Has to be some logical explanation to all of this, she mumbled to herself as she cleaned up the fallen flowers. Her head was still spinning as she sat down to make some posters of her missing cat. Later she put them up in the streets. Granny Anna wandered round until 11 o'clock, calling Jimmy's name even beyond her own neighbourhood. She was sorry she had been so cross with him. He wasn't really that naughty, was he? Tomorrow, she said to herself as she got into bed. Tomorrow I'll call the shelter to see if they have found him. That's all I can do for him tonight. Oh, Jimmy, you poor boy, where can you be? She fell asleep remembering the time when she had brought him home from the shelter. There was only a tiny scrap of fur in the large cardboard box. She had decided to get a kitten after her husband had died almost 2 years ago. Jimmy wasn't a quiet cat, in fact he was often very rowdy, but he made her laugh out loud and always slept at the foot of her bed at night. Dancing in the street. The next morning Jim woke up to loud, raucous laughter. Anton secretly fancied himself to be a great singer, but he was somewhat shy about it and kept it to himself. He was practicing his new song and doing a funny little dance to accompany the words. Slap, 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 slap went his big feet to the right, then slap, 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 slap to the left. With every 4 steps he would stretch out his right wing. He was frowning and concentrating on singing and doing his dance steps at the same time, which made it look even funnier. Grandfather and Genya were rolling around on the stone floor crying with laughter. Grandfather was holding his beak. Tears were streaming down his feathers. "Sing it again, Anton, my boy," he choked, trying to hold back the giggles. "Oi, what a talent, what a star." "One more time, Anton, sing it loud for Jimmy," croaked Genya. Anton nodded and proceeded to sing in his raspy voice. "In Amsterdam the streets are wet, we haven't had our breakfast yet, so throw to us a crust of bread, but please don't hit us on the head. Some cheese will do for those who sink, throw cake, throw fish, throw anything, la 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 la." "Well, gentlemen," said Grandfather Boris, "it ain't opera, but it is wonderful. Well done, Anton." It didn't take them too long to learn the new dance, and soon everyone was sticking his wing out at the right moment, except Jim, who stuck out his front leg. The whole song sounded like "Craw, craw, craw, meow." This is quite normal if you are able to understand your Animish grammar. It was nearly noon. The weather was sunny and rather cold when they emerged from their hideout under the bridge. They set off with high hopes of finding something to eat, dragging the shopping bag behind them. Sure enough, when they came to the first cafe, many people were sitting outside having lunch. Dutch people love to sit outside, even if it is too cold for other rational human beings. It is probably because the weather can be so rainy and dismal in the spring, most of the summer, and of course in the autumn and winter time too. The large, sprawling cafe stretched over another large bridge and had tables on both sides of the wide canal. Hardy, rosy-cheeked men and women sat in the crisp breeze eating their salads and toasted sandwiches. Many of them had big bowls of split pea soup, which the Dutch people call schnert. Schnert looks and tastes the way it sounds. "It's now or never," hissed Anton nervously. 1, 2, 3. Then they began to sing and dance. They performed it very well, considering that they had only practiced for an hour. When they stopped, bowed and looked expectantly at the crowd, everyone stared back at them with open mouths, and nothing happened at all. "What are they waiting for?" said Anton, a little disappointed. They repeated their performance, making sure that they were sticking their wings and legs out at the right time. All of a sudden, the little band was bombarded with bread, rolls, cookies, cheese, coins, pieces of sandwiches, herrings, chocolate bars, even a big bowl of snert was carefully laid on the sidewalk for them to enjoy. "Очень вкусно! Delicious! Yummy, yummy!" Genya exclaimed, heading straight for the steaming soup. It was thick, greyish-green, and filled with lumps of stringy meat and overcooked vegetables. "I knew he'd love this soup," whispered Anton. "Watch him eat, Jimmy. He's king of eating. See how loud he slurps his soup. It's just what he loves, mystery soup." By this time, Genya had plunged his whole head into the bowl. What a success! There was enough plunder left over for lunch, dinner, tomorrow's breakfast, and maybe even a midnight snack. The musicians stuffed all of the loot into their shopping bag, much to the amazement of the people sitting outside, and they ran away as fast as they could, dragging the woven bag behind them. Back in the hideout, they enjoyed a wonderful lunch. "Now, Jimmy, Genya," called Boris, who was still sitting at the table. "Stop that play fighting. Stop, I mean it. That sort of thing always ends in tears. Besides, we must discuss our plan to sell the diamond, and how much we should ask for it. Do be quiet, boys. We got to think about this." He pulled a little black velvet bag from under his wing. It had been tied around his shoulder with a black silk ribbon. None of them had noticed it because it had been perfectly hidden under Grandfather's wing feathers. "That stone isn't very big," said Jimmy. "It's no bigger than a peanut. How can a little thing like that be so expensive?" Then a beam of light shone through the broken window. The pink diamond began to shimmer and twinkle in the little room. Tiny points of coloured light danced around the walls. Sometimes there were flashes of dark purple, orange, amber, and brilliant rose. "Anton, are they butterflies?" Jimmy asked. He was trying to catch them in mid-air. "No, it is light from stone," replied Anton. "Magnificent, niet?" He had seen the diamond many times in Moscow. He knew how the reflected light shimmered on the walls of Grandfather's little house. Grandfather always showed it to them on Christmas Day. "Magic, magic," whispered Genya. He was respectful and still for once in his life, amazed by the dance of light and colour. They went over their plan one more time, then the church bells rang out the time. It was 2:30. They had to go, and they had to hurry because the Brown Horse Cafe was on the other side of town. Trouble in the Brown Horse Cafe. "We have come to see Jan the Rover," said Grandfather in a commanding voice. He was standing a little behind Genya. The cafe was dark even in the afternoon. Its walls were stained brown with 200 years of dust and tobacco smoke. The low walls were covered with posters that had been stapled on top of each other, at least 3 inches thick. There was a long wooden bar on the left side, surrounded by high 4-legged stools and a few tables. The owner must have been busy in the cellar, because the place had a forlorn kind of emptiness in the clear afternoon sun. Jan de Rover and his bodyguard Buck de Vries were sitting on a table near the rear window. Buck de Vries, a large ginger tomcat, had a toy mouse squashed under his dangerous-looking paws. He stared ominously at the little group of visitors, lashing his tail back and forth and growling. "He must be the biggest tomcat in the world," whispered Jimmy softly to Boris. "He's beautiful, look at him." Buck was a mass of muscles. Even his forehead seemed muscular. His right ear had a couple of large bites taken out of it, and he was covered with scars. Buck opened his mouth, growled again menacingly, and snarled, "Come closer." "Yeah, that's right, all of yous guys. Stay behind, Genya, just to be safe. I don't like the look of that cat," Grandfather whispered to Jimmy, who had been standing on his hind legs to get a better view. "Come here," sneered Buck. "Now." Grandfather Boris ruffled his feathers so as to make himself look bigger, and stepped out from behind Genya. "Boris Varonovich, you old rascal!" squeaked a high, cracked voice. Yandorova craned his neck forward and started to chuckle. He had a voice like a broken doll. It made him seem all the more dangerous. He stepped out from behind Buck-Buck. His eyes and his beak were red, and his voice was eerie enough, but his eyes... His feathers glittered blue and yellow in the sunlight. Jan was small for a parrot, and he stayed rather close to his fierce ginger bodyguard. "I never forget a face. Boris Varonovich, have a drink, mate." Jan was sipping thick chocolate milk topped with whipped cream. "Ha ha ha ha! How long is it since we last talked to each other, sweetie?" "Last year, I believe," replied Grandfather quietly. Well, dear old college buddy, what can we do for you?" Jan screeched. "Are you sure you don't want a drink? It's on the house, ha ha ha!" Chocolate is very bad for most animals. It makes them drunk, gives them tummy aches, and is quite poisonous for dogs and cats. The old raven shook his head and said, "Jan, we need to sell something. A stone. That's why we came to Amsterdam. You remember we spoke about it last year." "A stone, you say? Lovely, screamed Jan. "I adore a bird that gets right to the point. Yes, I do like that, don't you, Buck-Buck? My old friend wants to sell us something." He glanced at his bodyguard. The ginger cat growled softly, showing his teeth. Then he scowled at the group. It made him feel proud and strong. "Rah! You sell it, Jan the Rover? Rah, rah, rah!" shouted the biggest raven as he took a step towards Buck-Buck. "Take it easy, Genya," whispered Grandfather. He rested the tip of his wing on the angry raven's shoulder. "Calm down." "Why, Boris Varonovich, dear friend, where are your manners? And who are these lovely boys? Your sons, perhaps? Is that a little cat I see before me?" The little parrot's voice was oily and sweet. "Can you do it for us, Jan?" Boris asked, trying not to look too deeply into the ruby-red eyes of the fast-talking bird. Grandfather was beginning to lose his temper, but he tried to remain calm. Those blood-red eyes had a hypnotic quality about them. They looked like the eyes of the devil. "Not so fast, sweetheart," said Jan. "What kind of a stone are we talking about? May I see it? It is stolen, of course. All ravens steal things. It's a known fact. Everybody knows it." "We have a rare pink diamond," said Boris evenly, trying to keep calm, "and it is certainly not stolen. The jewel has been in my family since 1909, before the Great War. It belonged to my great-grandfather, Alexander. A rich countess gave it to him because he helped her send letters to her lover. She finally ran away from her family because they found the captain unworthy of their daughter. You see, he was a sea captain, not the right sort of husband for a countess. With my great-grandfather's help, they escaped to Odessa, where his ship was moored, and then they sailed on to Marseille, lived happily ever after, and had many children." When he heard the words sea and captain, Jan's face suddenly turned cruel and hard. He sat there stone-faced, silently listening, until Boris had finished his story. Now Jan's voice was sinister and much lower. "Boris, darling," he whispered, "my old friend, you know nobody ever mentions sea captains around me." Boris shivered. He realized he had said the wrong thing. He had accidentally reminded Yandorova of his terrible captivity in the cage. Grandfather Boris could see Jan's thoughts spinning round in his head. Jan's face showed a little of what he was thinking, but Boris couldn't read it. Jan was back in the time of his youth. He remembered the knife, the hungry days, the endless lessons, the never-ending cruelty of his master, the sea captain. He shook himself out of his past and said, "I couldn't have loved you more if you had been my own brother, dear Boris, so I'll be nice to you this time." He glanced at grandfather, pretending to be sad, shook out his feathers and coughed. "Now, sweetheart, let's get down to business, eh? So, my old friend, show me the stone." Jan trembled with excitement. He waited for grandfather to take it out of the bag. He couldn't let anyone know how valuable it was. Pink diamonds found only in Australia are one of the most expensive jewels in the world, and Jan Derova had always wanted to touch one. Even before he saw the jewel, he knew he had to have it. Boris took the gem out of the black velvet bag and carefully laid it at the feet of Jan Derova and his bodyguard Buck de Vries. He stepped back to stand with his grandsons and waited for the parrot to speak. Jan had a strong urge to kiss the diamond, but he held himself back. He had to be careful. They mustn't know his plan. "Oh, what a beauty! How it glistens! See the rainbow of tiny stars that light up the walls of this dingy cafe," he muttered so softly that no one could hear him. The words, "forever, forever, 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 forever," shone in the parrot's thoughts like scintillating sparks of light. Jan would take their diamond. Yes, he would take it. Finally he would have something he really wanted. It was his reward for all the terrible things that had ever happened to him, wasn't it? He deserved it, didn't he? Certainly after all this time he should have a little something for his own, shouldn't he? Boris took a step backwards. Everyone in the room noticed that Jan's face began to change to a tender and almost loving expression. Grandfather waited until the parrot could get control of himself.
Благодарю тебя за песенность города и открытие.